The neighbors mocked her house, calling it the biggest haystack in the county, and for a long time nobody could understand what had come over the woman who lived there. After one winter night, no one laughed anymore, and the following spring, rows of those same flowers appeared behind one house after another. Far away in a northern valley, where winter cut people off from the rest of the world for months at a time, there lived a woman named Anna. Her house was small, just 2 rooms, with a low door and a stove in the middle, and it stood at the very edge of the village. She and her daughter had barely made it through the last winter. The firewood ran out before the frosts let up, and for the final weeks they heated only one corner of the house and moved their beds closer to the stove. The coming winter promised to be even harder. The nearby woods had been cut down long ago, so firewood here was hauled in from far away. And that spring, the high water had washed out the bridge, leaving no way through to the distant forest. That left buying wood from Jasper, who owned the only woodyard in the village, but Anna had no money for it. One day in April, she counted the logs in the shed, counted them again, and realized that by the time the cold came, she would have only half of what she needed. Her husband had been gone for 3 years. He had walked out into a blinding snowstorm and never came back. His heavy coat still hung behind the door because Anna could not bring herself to put it away. And ever since, only 3 of them lived in the house: Anna, 9-year-old Mia, and an old dog. And that spring, while the neighbors were mending roofs and hauling timber, Anna dug up the ground around her house and planted hundreds of sunflowers. She was not planting them for the seeds or for the oil. She was growing herself a set of walls. By midsummer, the flowers had grown taller than the windows and closed around the house in a thick ring, so that from the gate only the roof could be seen. The first to stop was Thomas, a carpenter who had built half the houses in the valley. In those weeks, he was fixing a barn on the next property and rode past almost every day. He touched one of the thick green stalks and told Anna exactly what he thought. "The rains will come in the fall. This grass will soak through, and the damp will get into your logs. Mice will move in down at the ground, and if one spark flies out of the chimney, the whole thing will burn along with the house. You could have hauled in firewood in all that time." Anna answered him, "And where would I go for it? I cannot carry logs on my back all winter, they are too heavy. But these came up on their own while I was tending the garden." The carpenter said nothing to that, and only remarked as he climbed back onto his horse, "At least your house is small. You could never cover a big one with grass like this." Then Jasper came by. A narrow strip of her land ran between his 2 pastures, and he had wanted that strip for a long time, so he did not bother laughing and got straight to business. "Sell now, and I will pay full price. After the winter, for an empty house and abandoned land, I will give you only half." Anna told him the house was not for sale, and Jasper rode off without another word. The nickname stuck to the house on its own. People passing by in their carts would point their whips at the yellow wall that reached all the way to the roof and say that nobody in the county had ever put up a haystack like that. Anna could take the grown-ups and their jokes, but she could not bear her daughter's tears. The children at school called their house the nest, and Mia began coming home in silence, until one evening she burst into tears and begged her mother to take the weeds away. Anna went out into the yard, took hold of the first stalk, and was ready to pull up the whole row, but her husband's coat was hanging there in the open doorway, and after looking at it, she slowly opened her hand. In the fall, when the stalks had dried out and gone stiff, Anna cut off the heavy heads, spread them out in the attic, and set aside the best seeds for spring. Only then did she call her daughter over. She broke a stalk open lengthwise, and under the hard skin there was a light, spongy core full of tiny cells. "That is air in there," Anna said to her daughter. "The grass itself does not give any heat. The stove does. The grass only keeps the wind from carrying that heat away." Mia listened, but her face made it plain that she did not believe it. So Anna poured boiling water into 2 identical clay mugs. One she left on the table, and the other she set inside a box packed with bundled stalks. She explained nothing more and only told the girl to come back to the mugs after her chores. Mia remembered them toward evening, and when she touched both, the first one was barely warm, while from the second, she quickly pulled her hand away. Anna had not thought of this herself. In the village where she grew up, people covered cellars and cattle sheds with dry stalks for the winter, and her mother always repeated the same words, "The cold hunts for walls. Give it something else to find." But her mother had been covering stone cellars, and here there were logs, and Anna did not think about that difference at the time. The mugs had not lied. Dry grass really did hold the heat. Only the box had been sitting indoors on a dry table, while the wall would have to stand out in the rain all fall. Anna tied the dry stalks into bundles and laid them right against the logs of the house. Mia handed up the armfuls and held the rope while her mother tied the knots, and in a few days, the work was finished. At night, the rooms grew noticeably quieter because the wind no longer whistled in the corners. And then the rain set in. 2 weeks later, the lower bundles had turned black, and a heavy smell of damp filled the house, the kind you get in a cellar in spring. Anna pulled off one bundle, and the log underneath was shining with water, and the moss packed between the timbers had gone dark. Thomas pressed his thumbnail into the wet wood and said, "Leave it like this until spring, and it will not be the stalks you have to replace. It will be the bottom logs." "You were right about the logs," Anna said. "So far, only about the logs," the carpenter answered. That night, Anna did not sleep. Toward morning, she took her husband's coat off its hook, picked up a knife, and went out into the yard to cut all the ties and drag the bundles out behind the fence. But she stopped at the very first row because the coat still smelled the way it had smelled when he wore it. She stood there a while, listening to the water dripping from the roof, then went back inside and hung the coat back in its place. In the morning, Anna did start taking the bundles down, only now she did it carefully, untying the knots and stacking the dry stalks in the shed, not to throw them out, but to build everything again. That morning, Thomas was riding to the neighbor's barn again, and when he saw the stacked stalks, he stopped and got down from his horse. "So, you are going to build it again after all?" he asked. Anna nodded. The carpenter looked at the wet logs for a few seconds, then said, "Then do not press them against the house. Set them back a hand's width and put a cover over the top to keep the rain off." "Will you help?" Anna asked. With advice for now, Thomas answered. The next morning, Anna measured a hand's width out from the wall and drove in the first stake. She took the poles from the old chicken coop that had been empty for years, and by evening, a light, open fence ran around the house, set back from the logs. Into that gap, she packed the bundles, and over the top, she built a narrow roof to keep the water off. Mia handed up the armfuls the same as before. Now, the grass did not touch the logs anywhere. No rain ran down onto it, and the wall could be taken apart piece by piece, so that any day she could look inside instead of guessing what was going on in there. Near the chimney, Anna laid no stalks at all and left a wide empty space. Thomas said only that one spark was enough for dry grass, and rode away without adding anything else. From that day on, every morning, Anna wrote down 2 things in a notebook: whether the water had frozen overnight in the bucket standing in the coldest corner, and how many logs had gone into the stove. One morning, the gate of Jasper's pen was standing open, and his goats had eaten away a whole corner of the new wall. Jasper said the wind had torn loose the leather strap that held the gate shut. Anna picked the strap up off the ground and saw that it was not torn and had not slipped off. The buckle had been neatly undone. She laid the strap on the post and said nothing, because she could not prove anything anyway. Anna patched the corner quickly, hurrying to finish before the rain, and did not notice a gap right down at the ground. A few nights later, Mia woke up to a rustling in the wall. Mice had settled into the bundles. So Anna raised the bottom row, leaving an open space under the wall, and after that the old dog looked into it every evening. The mice did not care for such a neighbor, and within a few days the rustling stopped. From then on, Mia was no longer ashamed of the wall and began to look after it. Every evening she made the rounds of the house with the dog, checking the ropes at the knots. And over those weeks, she learned how each corner creaked, the way you learn the voices of people you know. Late in the fall, a night wind tore off the entire west side. The stalks were scattered all over the fields, and there was no new rope to be had. Anna had used up the last of it earlier that season, patching the corner the goats had eaten. She was walking across the wet ground, gathering the bundles that had survived when Thomas's cart pulled into the yard. He unloaded boards and brackets he had made himself the day before, took off his gloves, and worked with Anna until dark, while Mia held the lantern for them. They managed to pack the wall back in place after night had already fallen. Rope alone was never going to hold that west side, was all the carpenter said. And when Anna started to thank him, he answered, "Thank me if it is still standing in the morning." As he was leaving, Thomas set several wooden wedges on the windowsill and said that if a bracket ever worked loose, there was no need to pull the whole wall tight. She should just drive in a wedge. A week later, the first light frosts arrived, and from her notebook, Anna could see that she had to feed the stove noticeably less often than on equally cold nights before. But the real test had not come yet, and then the wind died away completely. The smoke over the village chimneys rose in straight dark columns. The sky turned the color of lead, and the old dog lay down under the bench by the stove and refused to go outside. Anna walked around the house one last time, checked every corner, and repeated her mother's words to herself. The cold hunts for walls. Give it something else to find. The blizzard hit at night. On the other side of the valley, in Jasper's big house, the fire roared without stopping. The merchant had more firewood and more rooms as well. But along with the rooms, he had more walls, more cracks, and more air that had to be heated. By midnight, he had burned almost all of his dry supply, and then a gust of wind damaged the chimney. The smoke began pushing back inside, and the fire had to be put out. In Anna's house, the stove was burning at half strength, and that was enough. The warmth was not the fierce kind that comes from a big fire, but steady and quiet. And the water in the bucket standing in the coldest corner never froze all night. Mia lay on the bench, reading by the lamp. The dog slept right by the stove, and every log now kept the house warm far longer than before. The wind struck the dry grass and broke it, and by the time it reached the logs, it had lost its strength. Then another sound came through the howling, a steady knocking of wood against wood. Mia, who knew the voice of every corner, understood before anyone else that something had torn loose on the west side. Anna took a wedge from the windowsill, opened the window a crack, and, without going outside, drove it into the loose bracket before the wind could rip the rest of it away. Outside, the stalks kept snapping, and nobody in the house knew whether the west wall was still standing. In the middle of the night, there was a knock at the door. At first, Anna thought another board had given way out there, but then a voice broke through the wind. Jasper was standing on the doorstep. With one arm, he held his daughter against him, and over his shoulder hung a sack with the last of his dry firewood. He opened his mouth to say something, but Anna had already stepped aside without a word. Jasper came in, and the first thing he did was set the wood down by the stove, and the wind and snow burst in behind him. Anna put one of the logs he had brought into the fire, and the flame rose for a little while. They hung the wet clothes up to dry and wrapped the girl in a blanket, and Mia brought her water herself. And then the stove went back to its usual quiet fire, and before long, the warmth in the room evened out again. By morning, the blizzard had passed, and the valley lay under a smooth blanket of snow, deeper than it had been in many years. As soon as it got light, Mia ran out into the yard ahead of everyone, waded around the house through the drifts, and saw that the west wall was still standing. Thomas arrived soon after. From first light, he had been riding from house to house, checking roofs and chimneys, and Anna's house happened to be first on his way. With his knife, he cut open one of the damaged bundles on the outer side and saw that a crust of ice had locked the stalks together on the outside, while inside they had stayed dry. The outer layer had been crushed and iced over, but everything behind it had come through. The wall had given the storm its outer edge instead of the house. Thomas put his palm against a log, and it was not icy. It was holding the warmth of the room. Then the carpenter noticed the notebook by the stove, and the entries showed that fewer logs had gone into the fire through the whole night of the blizzard than she used to burn on an ordinary frosty night. He said nothing, only stood there a long time looking at it, and afterward he went outside and looked the wall over once more. Jasper got ready to go home while his daughter was still asleep, and stopping in the doorway, he said to Anna, "The wind did not undo that strap." "I did. I thought you would give up and sell the land." Anna answered him, "Your daughter is asleep by the stove. Do not wake her." In the spring, Thomas was the first to mark out a row of sunflowers, not against the walls of his house, but on a dry patch of ground behind it. Several other neighbors did the same after him. They grew the stalks out in the field, dried them under a shed roof, and only in the fall packed them against their walls. And one morning, a coil of strong new rope appeared by Anna's porch, and she did not ask who had left it. The summer turned out long and warm. The fields behind the houses stood yellow all the way to the road, and the village got so used to them that it seemed they had always grown there. Nobody joked about haystacks anymore, and walls like that were now simply called flower walls. On the first cool day of fall, Anna met her daughter after school, and they walked home between the rows of dried sunflowers. Her father's coat was still too big for the girl, the sleeves nearly covering her hands, and she held a basket of seeds against her chest. As they passed the flower wall by Thomas's house, Mia ran her hand along the dry stalks and repeated the words her grandmother had once said. "The cold hunts for walls. Give it something else to find."